So could you speak a little bit to how the language of work can be used in a reorganization of the enterprise or of a business?
Sure. Well, let me speak from a lot of experience. First of all, I worked at one company literally in 10 years in which they attempted to reorganize things 7 times.
In how many years?
In 10 years,
Okay.
7 times. Now, and that, I mean almost company-wide. And it was a big company. So what was interesting about that is virtually every one of those attempts failed. All that it really ended up doing was kind of confusing people or setting up expectations that really couldn't be met. So that was one of the major things that I wanted to improve when it came down to developing the language of work. And it almost happened just by chance. Not totally that, but obviously as I was looking at work in its totality and trying to define it better, it became clear how to organize it better. And what that involves is applying what I call the business model to reorganize using the work formula. And the way that fundamentally happens, without going into a great deal of detail, is that it capitalizes on the right people and to define the organization at the right level and cascade that down through the organization such that almost literally everybody's involved, so that when they're involved, they'll become committed to the change instead of trying to add change on top of that. And the way it works is this. It's best to start at the business unit level where you take the executives and basically in a one-day session, maybe two at most, a day and a half, and you can sit down with them and they can define the business in terms of what it is as a business using the work model. And they come out with what we call a business unit model. And it achieves consensus on their part as to what the business looks like and or if they desire what it should look like if they wanted to change at that level what the organization might do or how it might work. Okay, so that's the first level. Then you go down to the next level where you involve key managers now, directors, vice presidents at that level. Core processes, we call it, developing a core process model. And what they're doing there is they're taking each one of the major outputs that was defined by the executives at the business unit level, and they're figuring out the core process model for that. So let's say it's a manufacturing thing, it's an assembly line thing, it's some kind of ING, it's selling, it's marketing, you name it, manufacturing. And their job is to define those processes using the model so that it lines up with the business unit.
Okay.
Not separated, but they have to exactly line up the inputs, the conditions, the process steps, and so on between the business unit and the core processes. And that probably takes an average group of managers a day to a day and a half. And one of the things they do while they're doing that is they identify what jobs are needed in order to execute those core processes.
Okay, and I want to stop you for a second and
Sure.
just clarify that point. So it takes about a day and a half, but not on their own. They've got a facilitator.
Absolutely.
Okay, who's helping them through the process.
They do.
Okay.
And realize that it's for every major core process, it's about a day and a half.
Okay.
So in a typical organization, there might be 4 or 5 core processes. So we're talking a week.
Okay.
Or a little bit more maybe. Okay, and in there they identify the jobs. So what we've done thus far in reorganization is identify what, the business unit, the how, the core processes. And now we come down to the meat of it, which is really what are the jobs and what do they look like and who's going to do it. And here we define the job models. And here what we do is we take exemplary performers of those jobs and sit them down in a session that takes about a half a day. And they define their job as it is or that it should be. Okay. Again, this is part of the change. Just as we might make a change in the business unit level, at the core process level, we might make changes in jobs at that level. So we define the job, and that's who's going to do the work. Then in the fourth stage here we're going to define the work groups and how they will be managed. And again, we're using that work formula to define the work groups. And if you think about it, that's really where the organization, when we think of reorganization, that's where the normal kind of reorganization occurs, where we're getting the work groups that are best suited in order to execute how we're going to do the work for what purpose, okay? So in most reorganizations that are done, executives have a tendency to start with the work group level and say, well, let's create this work group, and we'll put Charlie or Mary in the head of that, and that's how they go about it. And it's the last thing you ought to be doing, because you haven't figured out what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and who's going to do it. Once you do that, you can then figure out how to best organize it. And once you do that, then there are a few remaining steps after that, so that everything is complete, at least according to the language of work, which is you want to make sure you set standards where necessary. You want to figure out what we call the work support. The work support is essentially what does the organization need to provide in order for people to really do the work, okay? And that's fairly easy to do or assess how well it's being done now. Then we have to figure out if there are any human relations factors that need to be reorganized, changed in any kind of way. And finally, obviously, we need to figure out how we're going to finance this whole thing. So that's basically how we would typically go through reorganization. And in a mid-sized company, that could be done easily in a month. Whereas now, they take anywhere from 6 months to a year to do a reorganization that isn't done really that well. In this way of doing it, people are all involved in the process, so they're a part of the change, and they're actually making changes almost on the fly, you might say. But really what's happening, they're getting committed. They understand why and what's going to be changed and for what purpose, and what their role is in that change, so that when it happens, they're committed to making it happen. And there's no other system that I know of, approach to organization or reorganization that does this better than the language of work does.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.